my name's Mike Scrutton, and I've been working with Adobe for 20 plus years in the world of creating content, working primarily with the 2D industry, looking at applications such as Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, and working with designers to capture their ideas and make them digital. And then the flip side of that, of course, is that once we've captured these ideas and they're inside their computers, they want to know how do they get them onto paper, how do they print them, how do they share those creations that they've made with their customers so that they can appreciate them as well. And so there's this whole workflow of, that's sort of evolved around digital content in the 2D printing space, which now is beginning to be relevant in the 3D space as well. Now, we take 2D printed content in full color for granted these days, but color in 3D printing is still somewhat of a novelty. And one of the questions that I wanted to talk about this afternoon is, why do we need color in 3D anyway? And a second very important question, which is, what's the difference between something that's colorful and in content which is in full color? So growing up as a child of the 70s, I used to enjoy my TV as a kid. And we lived in this world, my sister and I, where we'd sit and watch our programs, and we'd enjoy Bagpuss and his many friends and his various other creations. And he looks fine, we enjoyed him, we enjoyed the stories, they became integral to our lives. But there was something missing from Bagpuss which we couldn't quite put our finger on, until we went to our grandparents' house, and they had a color television, and we could see Bagpuss in color. Well, we try and get around this at Christmas, we'd crack open the Quality Streets, and we'd get the little sweets and we'd unwrap them and we'd hold up the little bits of cellophane to our eyes, and we could be great. Now we can see in color, right? We could see a green Bagpuss or a purple Bagpuss or a yellow Bagpuss, depending on which kind of sweet we'd had. And that was all very well, but there was something completely missing. Bagpuss isn't gold or purple or green. What color's Bagpuss? Anybody? He's pink. He's got various other properties as well. He is saggy and a bit loose at the seams, but Bagpuss is fundamentally pink. And for the creators of Bagpuss, that was a very important design decision. So when they take that Bagpuss, the brand, and they want to do something else with him, they want to make toys, or they want to put him in an annual, or they want to put him on a lunchbox, it's very important to make sure that they have pink Bagpuss, just as the kids would see on the TV screen, and actually reproduce those on those other materials as well. The design and the intentions of those artists when they're creating those content were all important. Now, this is something which we've worked with, for millennia. If you go back as far as the artist that carved the Venus de Milo, there was a reason why that artist chose white marble. They're probably trying to convey something. Why didn't they use rosé marble or a black marble or something else? It was because they wanted to convey a particular idea, maybe about the purity of Venus or something else. And if you think back in terms of other technologies we've had in the last 100 years or so, before we had TV, we had movies and we had photographs and other stuff. And if you think about how those technologies emerged, they first of all emerged in a very much sort of single color, monochromatic world. We started off with photographs and lithography being a black and white, and then we would hand tint it because we wanted to get closer to that realism that people were looking for. And the same was true of films as well. We used to hand tint individual frames from celluloid to make those color movies before the technology caught up with us. Now, as we enter the 3D printing world, we can, of course, download models from various places on the internet, and if we're lucky enough to have maybe a desktop printer in our offices or in our homes, we can try and print those models as well. And we can choose any one of the many different filaments that might be available, and we can choose to print the Venus de Milo, if that's what we've downloaded, in any particular color we choose. If we've got blue filament, we can make a blue, or we can make a red, or we can make a yellow, and that's nice. I've now got a range of different Venus de Milos. I don't have the opportunity to say, well, she's got blue eyes, she's got auburn hair, she's got peachy skin. That's not something that typically I can do on my desktop. There's some various tricks we can do, and there are various printers around that allow us to change the filament, maybe by extracting it and putting new filament in, or maybe under control of a button, or maybe some software. But we're fundamentally limited in terms of the range of colors that we can produce in any one model on these desktop printers. Now, the desire to try and create and make things using the aesthetics that we're looking for is a problem that we've had for many, many years, hundreds of years. So at Adobe, we're trying to look at this sort of problem and try and understand exactly what the problems are here. Why is this so difficult in the 3D space when it's something that we've been used to in the 2D space for such a long time? So we did an experiment. We got one of our number, and we put him in his wedding outfit, put him on a turntable. There he is, looking very handsome. Obviously didn't put on any weight since his wedding. And we put him on a turntable, and we scanned him, and we digitized him, we put him inside the computer, and with a bit of playing around, we sent it off to a 3D print service. And a couple of weeks later, we got our model back in the post. Very nice. A couple of things surprised us. He was somewhat small. That we didn't quite, well, we kind of anticipated that. We know what size we purchased him. He was also somewhat green. And that wasn't really what we'd had in mind. And in trying to understand what's going on here, we actually went back to some of our school day physics and optics and try and understand exactly what's going on. And the logic is relatively straightforward. If you think back to your own times at school and we looked at what we were doing with color and what we were doing with light, we think about light as having a particular color. What sort of color do we think of light as being? Right. We think it's sort of a white, maybe a sort of a neutral color, all right? And if we actually analyze what's happening when we look at light, there's actually something very scientific that's going on here, and that's that light actually isn't a single color. It's made up of many different wavelengths of light that are hitting our eyes and the back of our eyes, and the rods and the cones are seeing that light and interpreting it in a particular way. And if we look at this diagram here, we see around the outside, you're seeing all the colors of the rainbow, right? You're going around from red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. All the colors of the rainbow. And of course, we remember again from our school physics, that's why we see the colors of the rainbow in a rainbow. It's because that light's being diffracted and we're seeing it broken up into its different frequencies, okay? So this is some work that was done back in the 1930s, and we analyzed, what makes up light. And the combination of light at different wavelengths, will give us this idea of white light as being the purest sort of light here. There's one color that's noticeable in its absence on this diagram. Anybody spot what it is? Right, black. Okay. Is black a color? Discuss. Keeps the color scientists going for quite a time down the pub, unless they're drinking Guinness, when it's definitely a color. There's another model which we commonly use in the color world, and it's got another name. We refer to it as LAB, and this is another picture which kind of depicts what's going on here. And you'll see that rather than having sort of the colors arranged around the outside in the horseshoe, we've got this idea of sort of light to dark, white to black going vertically, and where different colors radiate in different dimensions. And we'll see this come up again in a moment just to illustrate the point. The idea here in both these diagrams, though, is we've tried to capture the whole range of colors that might be available. So, if we look to what's going on our monitor, we see something particular that's going on. There's one thing that's worth noticing here, and that's that the colors that you're seeing here on this projector are actually subtly different to the colors that I'm seeing on my monitor down here. And that's because the way that my monitor here is behaving and the way this projector is behaving with the background light as well is affecting what we're seeing. But the general premise of what we see on our LCD monitors is that we have a range of LEDs. There'll be red LEDs, blue LEDs, green LEDs. And if all the red LEDs fire at once, then what we're seeing is red light. And if all the blue LEDs, we're seeing blue light, and so on and so forth. And if we fire them in different combinations, we'll see different synthesized color, okay? So if we have the red and the blue going together, we see this sort of purple, the green and the red, we see this yellow color. And if all three fire at once, we see this idea of white light. And these LEDs have been very, very carefully chosen so that in combination, they're going to give us the idea of perception of white light and give us a large range of colors that are available, for other variations as well. If we take this back to our big color diagram we had a moment ago, this is meant to be a depiction of typically the sort of colors that are available on an LCD monitor. And you'll notice it's quite a small subset compared to that large shoe of color that was available if everything was going at once. So we get some reds, we get some greens, we get some blues, but there's a lot of stuff missing around the outside. So we're getting a subset of the available colors that might otherwise be available, but we can't get to. And actually, we see that in this other depiction as well. This is a bit like that sphere that we saw a moment ago. We look at it top down. This is sort of another view of a subset, and effectively that's why we see white at the North Pole here. We're looking at top down, and so there's a limited subset of the colors that we might otherwise see. Now, this is all very well for LCD screens, but when we start printing things, we start making things, then the optics get subtly different again. When we print something, we're relying on some sort of light source. So if we were all sat in this room, and we turned all the lights off, and we blacked out the blinds, and we sat in this completely dark room, and we looked at the show guide that you had as you came into the show today, and you looked at the printed material there, what colors would you be seeing? A trick question, it's black, you can't see anything, right? So you need to have some sort of light source to actually enable you to see particular colors. And so what we're seeing in this diagram here is the idea that light is coming down, it's being reflected off the surface of the printed material and back into the eyes of you, the viewer. And so the colors that you're seeing are based on your perception of the light as it's reflected off that particular surface. Okay? So light, a pure natural light hopefully, is hitting that blue object, and what you're perceiving of that blue object is effectively the light that's being reflected into your eye. So effectively, some of that white light must, henceforth, be effectively absorbed into the material of that object for you to get that perception. And this is basically how desktop printers work. It's how commercial printers work as well. They're effectively on the same idea. Rather than having red, green, and blue LEDs, we now have a mix of a small, limited number of colored dyes and pigments, inks. Typically, what you would see in a desktop printer or a commercial printer would be some combination of yellow, magenta, and cyan. Fancy names we've just given to these particular shades of these colors. So this is where it starts getting fun. So anybody who's designing on the screen, maybe if you design for the web or you're creating models and you're coloring them on a desktop application, you tend to work in terms of red, green, and blue. All right? You're assigning red, green, and blue names to those colors to try and give them a visual appearance. When you're going to be printing them on paper, you're going to be using some dyes and pigments that have different properties. And whether you're printing on paper or you're printing on a 3D model, the logic is pretty much the same. There's some maths that you could use to convert from one world, the world of what you see on the screen, to another world, the world of what we're going to print. And there are various different ways of doing it. You can do it very, very simply and use simple maths, and you'll get an approximation, but it will look vaguely interesting. There's a problem you see here, and you might notice on the screen even. The green that we get in the middle on the top right over here is a completely different green to the green we're getting down here. So the maths is a little bit tricky, all right? Fortunately, we spent a long time at Adobe working out how this works, so we got you covered. So don't worry about that bit for now. There's another problem going on here as well, not just that the maths is a little bit funky. And it's kind of illustrated in this diagram here. What you see here is the same color gamut, we call it, that we have in the world. You know, all the available colors. And there's different shapes been drawn here and showing you what colors might be available on one particular machine or another. So we see this triangle again that we recognized for a moment ago, which was the colors that were available from your on the screen. And when you get this lozenge type shape of the colors that might be available from a CMY printer. So there's a couple of things that are noticeable here. There's one area right in the middle which falls inside of everything, and that's your sort of happy place, all right? Those are the colors that we can both see on the screen and we can print on our printer. So that's all fine and dandy. But then we get some of this area around the edges where we have some areas which are inside the lozenge, but outside the triangle. So there are some colors here that we can create on our printer, but that we can't see on the screen, right? Conversely, we've got some other areas down here, down in this sort of blues area and the reds and the greens over here, where we've got colors that we can see on the screen, but aren't within the capabilities of the printer. Okay? So we have this problem of, even if we can do the simple math to convert from one to the other, what do we do for this stuff that's out of range? Again, fortunately, we've learned how to deal with this sort of thing, and there are various tips and techniques that we have in the color management sphere that allow us to control for that and compensate for it. That's one of the reasons why what we're seeing when we print something isn't the same as what it was on the screen. We're having to do this compensation. It has to be trade-offs. So one of the things that we did back in I did back in the office was to try and see how this works in the real world in the 3D printing space. Now, one of the features that we have in Adobe Photoshop, and have had for about 6 or 7 years now, is the ability to take a 3D model and import it into Photoshop and to do various beautiful things to it. We can add color. Now, I'm an engineer, so I'm not very artistic. Save that for somebody else. But I was able to take this model that I downloaded off the internet from Porsche's website, and I gave it a nice shade of blue, and I can make it decorative. I put some flames on the bonnet and some flames down the side, and actually there's a little bit of text hiding down above the wheel arch there. So I can make it nice and beautiful. And this is something that a lot of our users do on a very regular basis in the 3D space. Rather than making this car, shipping it to somewhere in France, closing the street, waiting for the light to be correct, getting the camera team there, building the lighting, everything else, we can simulate this within software. So you even see in here, even somebody with my crude ability was able to add some shadows from the car, from the street lights, and some reflection off the road surface as well. So this is great. So we have this idea now that we can take a model, we can colorize it, we can see how it would look, all within this virtual world. And if I wanted to move this car to Highway 1 in California, it's a couple of clicks. It's very easy to do. Well, one of the things we added to Adobe Photoshop this past year was the ability to print these models. Now we've made them beautiful within the software as well. As we know, there's lots of 3D content out there, but as somebody said this morning, it's not all printable. So that's something we had to make sure that we compensated for as well. So we added this capability to Photoshop, and so what I thought I'd do would be to take this single model that I made and output it to a range of full-color 3D printers. So that's what I did. I went to the nice little print preview within the application, and I lined it up, decided what size it was going to be, and I sent it off to the first printer via an online service. This car has been printed on a 3D Systems Project 650. And it came back in the post, and it came back, it was blue, and it's got some nice flames on it, which is kind of what I had in mind, so I was quite pleased with that. I sent it off to another printer, another bureau, to see what happened when I did it with them. And they had one of the brand spankly new 3D Systems Project 4500s. Ooh. And it came back, and you can probably make this out even with this projector. It came back different shade of blue. The flames are somewhat different in their depiction, but it was the same car. So I then take the same model again, and I sent it to an M-Core Iris, and another full-color 3D printer, and I get my result back, and I get a nice different shade of blue. I like the detail. The flames I like. I can even, you might not be able to see it from down there, I can even make out the name that's been written above the right wheel arch. So I'm getting some other benefits. I'm getting some other details. But if I was a professional designer and this was for real rather than just a bit of fun that I was doing at home, this would start to bother me now. I don't know which of these particular models, when I send it off to print, am I going to get back. And we think back to the problem we had with Bagpuss, or the problems that we were having with the Canadian Navy. You know, for them, it was very, very important to know what color were they going to get back, because they wanted it, remember, to be their color camouflage and not the competition. Okay? And so this is the problem. I'm almost going to stop there, but don't panic just yet. It's not quite the end of the story. This is technology that we're working on at Adobe with manufacturers of the 3D printers. So invite me back next year, and we can talk about exactly how this manifests itself in real life. There's one other picture to throw up here. There's a fourth car. This actually is not printed on a full-color 3D printer today. This is the Stratasys Object 500 Connex 3. And we're seeing some promise here. There's some good detail in some of the definition. Color needs a bit more work, but actually, you know, here's a technology you wouldn't think would be capable of depicting this car nicely, but actually it did a reasonable job. We ask ourselves, you know, why are these things all different? And we've given a hint at what the technical story is behind that so far today already. visually, this is the scientific bit which explains why they're different. And I'm not really going to go into a lot of detail that goes on here because I breach all sorts of non-disclosure agreements and stuff. But the lozenge you see there on the far left, that's the original gamut of the monitor that you remember we saw earlier on this afternoon. That's the capability of the printer, of the screen itself. And the other 3 lozenges we're seeing here are the different behaviors of those other 3D printers, and they're different. And because they're different, they will need different treatments in order to make sure that the color that you want to have is going to look correct when it's printed. So there's one other last teaser I'll leave you with. You remember at the beginning of the story, we talked about how we printed our bridegroom in full color, having got him out from his wedding outfit. We brought his bride in sometime later. We had to go with her. And we actually were quite pleased with the results. We think we've learned an awful lot about the technology now. We see how to make this work. There she is. She's looking particularly beautiful in her finery. And we were able to scan her and print her. And frankly, she's looking quite happy. OK. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Appreciate your coming.